Hello and welcome to BetterTech. I'm Colin McCarthy, your new host. With a foundation in IT and a history of guiding companies through technological evolution, I'm here to explore the dynamic world of tech with you. From spearheading the growth of a small enterprise IT department to managing global teams, I've seen firsthand how technology transforms business. At BetterTech, we'll dive into these transformative trends, connecting with thought leaders to uncover insights that propel success and innovation. So let's get started today with a great guest who really knows the intersection of technology and business. Welcome, Pascal. Please introduce yourself and give us the elevator pitch about your business and how you think AI can change your business.
Sure, yeah. Great. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be on the podcast today. My name is Pascal. My background is in machine learning, computer vision. Now I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Bardeen. What we do with Bardeen is we take all this repetitive workflows that we all have in our daily lives of copy pasting data from one tab to another for our lead management, recruiting, project management, sales, you name it. And we transform it into a simple one-click workflow automation solution. So you probably have heard about companies in the RPA space that are automating heavy business workflows, and those are typically not very accessible to the end user. And what we're trying to do with Bardeen is we're using AI and machine learning to make it very easy and accessible for every one of us to automate our own workflows. And the idea there is that people can help save a lot of time, remove friction from workflows, and just make our lives easier and get rid of all those annoying and tedious tasks that we're all doing every day. So,
right, yeah, there seems to be a huge explosion of companies providing this no-code, low-code workflow automation. And obviously, AI has seemed to appear out of nowhere for a lot of us, sort of a lot of end users. It's just magically appeared. But AI has been around for a long time. Large language modeling has been around for a long time. So how has it evolved over the years, and where do you think it's heading in the future?
Sure. I mean, I think about where it's heading in the future, it's always hard to predict the future. What we've seen historically is that number one is it's becoming a lot more accessible these days. So as you pointed out, like language models themselves are around since at this point, like 7-8 years. There were previously very technical consumer interfaces. So you had to understand what an API is. You had to be able to build your own app and program typically to be able to access those models. And then ever since ChatGPT and other competitors, now there's interfaces that we all know and understand. We all know and understand how to write text messages. We do it every day with our friends and our parents and everyone. And now it's an accessible interface. So I think that was a big driving force to make just everyone in the world more aware of what AI and what the language model technology can do. There's obviously this other huge trend about more data and more compute that really accelerated in the last 6-7 years, where there's just a lot more data available. It's a very interesting exponential growth curve about the amount of data that we have produced as all of humanity. And that's text data, video data from chat, from social media, many other forms. And then also compute becomes much more available and cheaper, to the extent that we now can train models of the size of hundreds of billions to even in the limit trillion parameter models that were previously unthinkable. And it turns out actually that in machine learning, what happens, which wasn't necessarily obvious, but what turned out to be true, is that the larger your model and the more data you have, the more powerful it becomes. And that's what we're seeing now with companies like OpenAI and others pushing the envelope, where they just manage to build bigger and therefore better models. So I think if I had to predict the future, I think that trend will most certainly continue. You're already seeing that in the last 2 years, we went from tens of billions parameter models to now hundreds of billions parameter models. There's a few endeavors that are training trillion parameter models now, and I think that will continue. And with that, we will see more powerful, more versatile models. I think at the same time, we see the end user adoption being a big driving force. Companies like what we're doing and many others, we're trying to actually take this technology and make it useful for the end user, right? Having a ChatGPT type interface is cool, but it doesn't necessarily solve your business problems, right? Like there needs to be another step that actually brings this technology into your workflow, into your whatever you're doing as a knowledge worker, and make it really accessible and useful to you. And I think that's just the beginning today. So like, if you look at the companies that are seeing, seed Series A fundings these days, like early stage companies, that's like almost all of them are now working on this problem of how do I make language model technology or AI in general more accessible to end users. And I think that we will see to continue in the next 2 or 3 years, and that will like radically transform how companies work, I think.
Right. Yeah, it certainly is making it more accessible to end users with the use of natural language. And you don't have to learn, as you mentioned, APIs. You don't have to be a master of post or get commands. You don't, have to know SQL languaging to sort of extrapolate the information you need out of that data. And thankfully there is just a huge amount of data for these models to learn from, and more faster processing power to be able to process it in a time that is acceptable to people, because everybody expects everything to be there instantly. So how do you see the transition of machine learning and AI really starting to interact with marketing, development, fintech over the next 5 years?
Yeah, sure. So I think like what we focus on with our company is really bringing AI into like everyday workflows. There's a huge amount of like stuff people do that's just repetitive, like copy paste around and so on. And what we're trying to use AI for, or what we are using AI for, is like 3 different levels of things. One is content level, so like actually, for example, like drafting an email or writing a marketing piece or writing a summary, of a blog post that you're trying to understand for research, or like depending on what your use case is. So the actual content layer. Second part is on the interaction layer. So how do I actually do something in an app? Do I have to like fill every form manually? Do I have to submit every lead in my CRM system manually? Is there something I can use to automate these things, right? And then the third layer for us that we think about is really on the building aspect. So the interesting part about workflow automation is everyone's workflows are slightly unique, right? Like we all, we both might be working in sales, and we sort of kind of like get leads from somewhere and put them in some sort of CRM system and write some sort of outreach, right? But like you might use a different CRM system to me, and you might get your leads from a different place, and your outreach emails will be slightly different. So there's this huge amount of combinations that you have to actually cover to be able to automate everyone's workflows. And that complexity we are solving for with machine learning, in the sense that in Bardeen's interface today, you can simply describe what you want to automate in natural language. And then we take that abstract description and build a workflow for you that you then, can obviously edit if there's things that were misunderstood, and you can kind of iterate on it. But we built this like first draft of a workflow for you. And that interaction layer, I think, is something that's or a building layer, that's something that's new now with this last wave of AI technology that we haven't seen as much. Previous, the last 2-3 years was very much focused on this like content layer of summarizing a blog post, writing a draft email, and all this type of stuff. That's, I think, at this point more of a proven technology, and we see this adopted widely. And like now the next 2 layers, I think, is where the interesting stuff will happen. around like new modalities in which we use and interact with technology. I think there's a real scenario where, you know, I don't want to say timelines, but like, you know, in the near future, we don't necessarily need to use like mouse and keyboard anymore. We can just simply, you know, describe in natural language, maybe via voice, what we want to do, and then systems can figure out like, you know, what do I actually need to do? What are the single steps that need to be completed for me to actually execute the work that the user is trying to do? So I think that's something new that's really exciting with this latest wave.
Right. Yeah. I chuckled in at the end of that. I was thinking about Star Trek. There were really no mice and keyboards in Star Trek, and everybody would just say, you know, hey computer, you know, tell me, you know, how far we are to the nearest star base or whatever. So yeah, it is, and I think there is a start of that already with Google Assistant, Siri, Alexa, you know, and voice is becoming so much more of an input. I see so many people using voice to interact with their phones and dictate emails and text messages. It will be quite a change. So when you look at an AI solution versus, say, an expert in a subject, do you feel that AI provides an equal or better outcome, or is it just a time versus money type of scenario?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard question to answer. It's a very, I think it really depends on the specific, you know, question. I do think that, you know, like fundamentally the way these large language models, which, you know, today when we talk about AI, that's most of the time what we mean. There's other systems that are more like expert reasoning, neurosymbolic systems, more like, you know, other machine learning systems that have traditionally been used in those types of solutions that today largely get replaced with large language models, but not everywhere, right? So like if we kind of concentrate this conversation on the language model part, then there's one really important kind of fundamental principle we need to understand, which is that these systems essentially predict the next word. There's no real understanding of the context matter, right? So like if I talk to, for example, a legal expert, the legal expert, and I have a legal question, right, just for sake of example, what this legal expert will do is he will try to understand and dissect like an abstraction of the problem that I have. Say it's an IP problem, then he will think about like, okay, what are all the different like variables at play here? What's an abstract representation of this problem? And how do I then fit this abstract representation of the problem into this like knowledge base that I've essentially accumulated over the years of experience from past cases, the law, you know, applicable rules, all this type of stuff. On the other hand, like a large language model, what it basically does is it looks across the vast corpus of other texts that it has learned, and it predicts a stochastic likelihood of what's the next token, or in the abstract, we can think about words. What's the next word that is likely to occur? There's no real understanding, or at least no real representative understanding of what the question or the answer is. Now that it works really well in a lot of cases, but it doesn't work, it can become a big problem, right? So I think the power of, you know, what we have now with language model technology and so on is really like making humans and machines work together. Like these language models are amazing and obviously much better than any human expert will ever be at just understanding a vast amount of data in a very short period of time, right? Like if I give you a book and ask you to summarize the book, you will first have to read the book, which takes you anywhere from days to maybe a week. Versus if I give like, you know, ChatGPT, for example, a book, and I ask it to summarize it, it's a matter of seconds, maximum a minute, right? But then again, there's some things that it will miss, it will maybe like not have understood, some very subtle like cultural cues that are really important for me as a reader to understand, but the system may just like completely ignore this. So I think like the interesting parts is when you have well-trained human experts and machine learning systems working together. And I think that's really like unlocks a huge amount of productivity. And again, kind of in the aspect of workflow automation that we think about, we don't try to replace like what an user is doing. I think that's a very dangerous approach. It's
Right.
going to
Yeah.
fail in a lot of aspects, and I think it also will have a lot of societal just pushback because no one really wants to be replaced at their job, and it's a tough sell, to go to people and be like, hey, like I'm gonna build this thing that will replace you. Like no one really wants that, and I think it's also not the right thing to do for reasons we just talked about. I think the more
Right.
interesting approach is, no one wants to do the boring work of like copy pasting data around. Here's a solution that you can use to remove this, boring, repetitive, high friction work from your workflow so you can concentrate on the things that you're really good at, and
Right.
that's where you can really add value. And then you bring kind of the best of both worlds from like what human experts are good at and what machine learning systems are good at together. And I think that's where like the really exciting stuff happens.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to use the legal field as a example there, because there have been some horrific examples where lawyers have relied on information that they've got from ChatGTP and it's been incorrect or fake. And also I have seen in Google Workspace's announcements for Duet AI and Microsoft's recent announcements at their conference about Copilot, all of the messaging and all of the functionality is about improvements in productivity for the way that the knowledge workers are working. It's giving them better access to data. And in the example of certainly with your platform, reducing those repetitive tasks you might have to do can really add to the suite of collaboration tools that they have access to and they're using every day. I've seen the examples of improvements in note taking in a Zoom call or a Google Meet call or a Teams call, and being able to get out or pick out, like if I ask you to do something, then the AI platform has the ability to automatically create that as a task, rather than you having to sit there with a notepad and be cognizant of everything that's said and write it all down. It is not about replacing people. It is about improving their working lives and helping them become more efficient and a lot more productive and getting access to data at the right time, I think.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
that's always what technology has been about, right? Like technology is, I think like good technology is almost never about replacing things. It's always about like increasing capacity and improving processes. And, you know,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
true for
yeah.
computers, it's for email. Like we used to write handwritten letters and like send them, and it would take days or weeks to arrive. And now I can do it on a keyboard, like in a matter of, milliseconds. It's halfway across the world to you in the US. So it's like, it's I think that's always true for technology. And the interesting thing is, because honestly I think sometimes this is like Hollywood's fault in that sense, is that like when people think about AI or talk about AI, a lot of people think about this conscious agent that has their own will and function of like trying to replace something or achieve something. All the systems that at least I'm aware of today, they don't necessarily have their own goal functions, right? They're much more about like, tell me what to do and I will do it for you.
Right. Yeah.
They can achieve certain things faster and better than we could, but they don't necessarily aim to replace anyone, right? And I think like at least all the companies that I know today that are developing AI foundation models and so on, they actually do this with very big care to not create systems that are replacing people and trying to achieve their own goals. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you talk about Hollywood. There's always, the classic scene in was it Dave Hal open the Bombay doors. Sorry, Dave, I cannot do that. Where the robot is refusing to do something. Yeah, we're not going to get to that stage where you ask the AI platform to check my calendar for next week and refuse
I
to do that.
I mean, yeah, actually, like sometimes these systems will refuse to do things, but more because they are programmed not to do things that are outside of the scope, right? Like not because they have like, oh, I don't want to do this because my will is against your will. It's much more like I've been programmed not to,
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
statements about political leaders or something like that, and then they will not do that because they've been programmed not to.
Yeah. Yeah. So, talking about all of these advancements, what do you think is the most exciting recent breakthrough in AI?
It's hard to pinpoint one. I think honestly, for me, I think about this as a much more like continuous spectrum rather than like big breakthroughs. So the fundamental technology that like things like, the large language models are based on, neural networks and then
Hmm.
transformer networks and large transformer networks and so on, like tokenizers. It's been around since a few years, right? Like as we touched on before, at this point, what's exciting is the scale at which these systems operate and the amount of data they've been trained on, and just the amount of impact they can have because of the scale of the systems that they're deployed on, like huge compute clusters that are really expensive to run because now there's proof points, right? So like it's kind of this continuous cycle. The more useful the technology becomes, the more money will flow into the industry. The more money we have, the more compute they have to train system, the more data they have, and it kind of
Hmm.
becomes this self-fulfilling cycle, right? And I think it's hard to pinpoint like specific breakthroughs. I think one thing or development that to me is personally really exciting, and this has nothing to do with what we're working on today, it's more like intellectual curiosity, is the idea of applying AI and machine learning in biotech, right? So like we've seen with COVID, there was a big push to develop vaccines very quickly, and actually like something like large language models has been tremendously helpful there in pushing the development of the first vaccines, orders of magnitude faster than we would have traditionally been able to do this with older technologies. So I think that type of stuff is super interesting. I personally am pretty biased. Like I think productivity is an exciting application field. I think like if you just think about the amount of work people do that doesn't necessarily add that much value, but it's just kind of this long tail of copy pasting. Like I'm a recruiter, for example, right? And then like I
Right.
identify that like, oh, like Colin is a great candidate, I would love to talk to Colin about this role, and now like this is kind of the value that I add, right? Like I
Yeah.
decide a good candidate, but now there's this long tail that I have to still get your profile information into my record system. I have to write them more or less customized outreach email. I copy paste a bunch of stuff around. I maybe send your profile in our recruiting Slack channel and like all the stuff, and it takes me 5 to maybe even 15 minutes every time I do that for a candidate. That it's like important, it needs to happen, but that's not, again, it's not like what I'm uniquely good at. I'm uniquely good at maybe identifying candidates for the right role. And
Hmm.
like removing this friction will now enable me to just be like a lot more productive, like 10x more productive, find 10x more people, and so on. And I think like if you can remove that friction, and this was just an example, right? Like you can
Yeah.
do that across all different roles. Now you unlock this huge amount of productivity, right? That like now can be directed for other things. And I think that can be a huge leverage for all of us in like becoming more productive. And if we all become more productive, I think we will see overall progress in AI technology, but also other fields
Hmm.
just vastly accelerate because people waste less time on useless tasks. So I think that's something that I'm personally very excited about, which is why we're working on solving this problem.
Right. Yeah. And that's a brilliant example with the HR recruitment example. I saw that on the YouTube video that's on your website, and it was very exciting the way that it does cut down and improves productivity and the ability to get the right candidates in that example. But obviously, there's 101 or a million and one other different automations and processes that can be improved and really help businesses. So when businesses are considering implementing AI,
Mhm.
what sort of key factors should they be considering? Should it be just cost, data privacy, any of the ethical concerns?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It really depends on what business you're running, right? Like if let's stick to the recruiter example, right? Like a
Mm-hmm.
recruiter deals with a lot of like very sensitive personal information, right? Like now, like, privacy and security obviously are big concerns. If on the other hand, I run like a YouTube agency or a blog, post writing agency, there's much less concern about, leaking data or leaking information. So in that example, like privacy or data security would still be important, but not as important, right? Like, so, but there I would much rather focus on like higher throughput, like faster systems and so on. So like, it really depends on like, what is my specific use case, and what's my background, like what data do I deal with, what level of sensitive data do I have in my company. I think in general, there's maybe a few things I can say like everyone should think about, right? One is, what's the highest ROI? There's like a million projects probably everyone can do in AI these days. And some of which may be less useful than others. So I think I would always think about like, how does this impact your business overall? And that may be through saving time for your employees so they can be more productive. It may be through reducing error rates because you can standardize processes when they're automated.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe through increasing your bottom line because now you can do 10x more with the same resources, so therefore you have a better operating margin. It can be through doing things that were previously completely impossible to do. So like, we've seen this actually with users of Bardeen that are now starting businesses that previously, like, without automation wouldn't really work. Like, they wouldn't have made sense to do. Like, it's actually interesting. One of them is doing a podcast pitching company. They're basically,
All right.
like, you subscribe to them
Mm-hmm.
and they help you get on podcasts. This is not how we met here, but like, I think a really interesting kind of a business proposal that can be very useful marketing for a lot of young companies and startups that was previously like really hard to do because, like, in order to land one or two successful placements, you may need to do like hundreds of outreaches, right? And if you do that manually, I don't know if there's, I don't know if that would work from a business perspective. Versus now they do it automatically, but they do it in a very highly personalized way because they have, again, large language models running the personalization and identification and all this type of stuff. So they can now do this as a business model that was previously probably not possible to do. So I think that's another type of things that I think are really exciting, is obviously like standardizing processes, saving costs through automation, and increasing efficiency, but also like think about what are all the new things that you can do today that was previously impossible. One of my favorite examples of this last one is Duolingo.
Right.
Sure, you know about Duolingo. They were one of the first, adoption partners of OpenAI's language technology. And obviously everyone would love to have their own personal language tutor, right? Like, but like, that's just impossible for them to do because they have millions and tens of millions of users. So like, they would need like millions of language tutors doing that. Like, it's just virtually impossible.
Yeah.
So, but now with these language models, they can actually do that because they can have a chatbot similar to ChatGPT that like actually coaches you one-on-one on language, and it understands the context of your progress. It understands your weak points. It can be very highly personalized. So that's something that I think is like super exciting, new, that previously was pretty much impossible to do, at least at the price point at which Duolingo wants to provide this, right? Like, obviously you can do it if people pay hundreds of dollars a month, but
Yeah.
work at scale. So I think those types of things are super exciting.
Right. Yeah. My wife uses Duolingo at the moment to refresh her Spanish knowledge, and I'm amazed at how engaging that platform is, and how helpful it has been for her. So yeah, if that's AI powered and providing that, then that's really good. If we continue the thought on the HR process, as it's been mentioned a couple of times, in what ways can AI-driven tools contribute to fostering a more inclusive and diverse workspace? And what considerations should those HR professionals consider when implementing AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question again. In terms of inclusion, so I think there's that obviously with new technology there come new risks, right? Like, I think one thing that has traditionally been a risk in automating, especially in HR and something like that, is that like these systems will have biases. Frankly, the same way that humans have biases, right? But if you're trying to build like a fair recruiting process, for example, or HR practice, then having biases is a really bad thing. So that's always something that you have to think about, right? Like, which again makes it powerful if you combine automation with humans in the loop. If you could just completely rely on an automated system, then you wouldn't have ways of catching, maybe things that aren't unfair to candidates. If you then add a human in the loop that can, just continuously check on the progress and decisions that the system is making, then you have a chance of actually catching these errors and correcting the system over time. I think there's a really cool, like, for example, I can give you like a concrete example from like our own case. So we're right now actually looking for hiring a product manager in our team. And we wanted to bring someone on board who has like previous founder experience and, kind of like can own products end to end and so on. We've made a few LinkedIn posts about it, and one of them, my co-founder posted, went really viral. Like we had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of views on it, which was very surprising.
Good. Yeah.
But what happened there is like a lot of people like added us on LinkedIn, like, 600-700 people, I think, in total. And, we obviously wanted to evaluate, everyone who reached out, but it's frankly impossible to look at like 800 profiles in a few days, right? So, or do it in a thorough way, right? Like you can obviously look at them really quickly, but then you don't really evaluate well. So what we did for that is we built an automation in Bardeen that would basically get all these profiles into, in our case, a Google Sheet, but whatever system you would want, gets all these profiles into the Google Sheet, and then actually looks at, like, in an automated way, gets every single one of these profiles, adds the data of, what did they do previously, what's their description, skills, all that stuff, and then runs a custom classification algorithm that we trained before for our specific, profile that we were looking for. Previous founder, worked in a, startup before, has experience, productivity tools, AI, automation, that type of stuff. And like basically classified all these 800 profiles for us in this Google Sheet so that we could focus on the ones that were the most relevant. And we actually then went through all those, we were just kind of like random picked examples of the ones that said, oh, these are wrong. These are like not part of our, classified sample set. And we caught a few examples where it was like, oh, actually, this was someone we would have loved to talk to, but the model didn't catch it. But then what it allowed us to do, again, like kind of combining human and machine intelligence, is we could go back and we can adjust basically the classification criteria we give it. And we included a few things like, hey, like we said in the beginning, we said like we only want people like who are in the US time zone, right? But then like we saw a few candidates who were like exceptional, who are not like in the US time zone. And we said like, okay, hey, actually, we don't care, even if it's like Europe time zone, as long as the candidate is like really, really strong fit on all other criteria. And then we ran the model again, and it got like a bunch of, new candidates. And like that way we kind of could run I think what felt like a very fair, unbiased kind of process that would help us basically cut down the time that we would have spent on interviewing like 800 people to focus on like a handful that now we have some really promising leads from that. And I think that's a really cool example of, how you can use AI and automation in your workflows that can save time and make things possible that frankly previously were impossible to do for us.
Right. And it was brilliant that you looked at the data and you trusted it, but you verified it, and you were then able to retrain it and tweak it and open up those parameters. And I know that having recently applied for a job in the last 3 months, applying through those automated systems and hoping that whatever technology behind it is properly, evaluating my skills and abilities based on what the preset requirements are for that company. can be a little bit hit or miss, but it's great to hear that you know, really utilizing your own platform and revising it to open up the scope and not miss out on those amazing candidates that are there. And it is terrible to be missed purely because, you know, the computer wasn't looking for your one particular amazing ability and downgraded you when, you know, that capability should have put you to the top of the pile.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's like a almost like a design fault in a lot of existing systems that they're very intransparent to the end user, right? Like I think it's again one thing we're trying to achieve with what we're building at Bardeen is to make it like, you know, as easy and accessible as we can to the end user, right? Like if you're using something that's, you know, more of like a black box, like, hey, we will find you the best candidates no matter what, but we won't tell you how, you know, like then it's stuff like, I don't know, like you can trust it or you can't, you know, I can't evaluate it. Versus what we're trying to do is much more like we give you the tool set, like, you know, you can build something that gets data from website. You can build something that adds things to Google Sheets. You can build something that, you know, builds your own classifier. But all these things are like accessible to you and they're transparent to you in the way that you can then go in and like change the criteria if you feel like it's missing something.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's kind of, we're trying to strike the right balance between removing technical complexity to make it easy to use, but still like exposing enough so that you can, you know, go in and actually understand the system, how it works, and like make those changes if they're required. So
right, yeah, that's great. So earlier on you mentioned about CRM. So in the context of sales automation, what are the key benefits and challenges associated with using AI to streamline these routine tasks? And how can sales professionals strike a balance between automation and maintaining a personalized approach to customer interactions?
yeah, I think it's a, you know, great question, and it leans very much on the HR example that we just talked about. I think, you know, fundamentally, I mean, obviously it's different when you're recruiting someone or when you're trying to sell your product to someone. But I think if you think about it from like a workflow skeleton, they're very similar workflows, right? Like I try to identify candidates or prospects. I try to qualify them either for a role in my company or for, you know, being a potential customer for my product. Then I usually want to store them in some sort of system, right? Whether that's your applicant tracking system for recruiting or your CRM system for customer relationships and sales. And then you want to do a customized outreach or customized conversations. No one wants to get, you know, and I get hundreds of them every day. Like no one wants to get like standard boilerplate, like sales outreach, or for that matter, recruiting outreach emails. So you always have to customize them to some extent. Again, this is kind of where the new language technology, I think, comes in actually really handy. You know, like for the longest time being, I wrote my own recruiting outreach emails when I wanted to talk to people. We did a lot of recruiting from GitHub, for example. So I would look at, you know, engineers who have relevant skills, who have contributed to relevant repositories, and then I would have actually a Bardeen automation that would like, you know, get their email address and then like basically put an email in my draft folder in Gmail, but the body of the email was pretty much empty. So I would always then manually go in and write this, you know, like, oh, you know, Colin, I really liked your profile because I see that you've contributed to workflow automation repository X and it's relevant to what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. Now, actually, with the latest language technologies, they're actually really good at doing this. You just have to feed it the right relevant information, right? Like, and this is where it's powerful to build your own customized workflow in the way that's relevant to your business. Maybe I'm selling a developer experience product, you know, for building large language models. There's lots of right now. And for that, it's again the same thing is really relevant. Like which repositories did you contribute to? What kind of programming languages are you using? Again, if I get my leads from GitHub, for example. And then these are all input variables I can send into a customized prompt with these language models. And then they will actually write a really good outreach email. Again, I don't recommend fully automatically sending them. I always, when I use these automations myself, I always put them in draft folder, not fully send them. But it like still automates a lot of the work for me, right? Like instead of having to do like one candidate or one potential sales lead, and then doing the whole thing takes me 10 minutes. Now I can do like, 50 leads, 50 or so leads, and then I have 50 emails in my draft folder at the end of the session. And then I go through those emails and I make sure, like, do I say anything bad? And they're like, did the model hallucinate in any way? Did it make up some stuff that's not relevant? And just kind of like give it a human check. Again, we talked about this before.
Yeah.
It kind of passes my human approval check, then I will actually send the email. So I think those are kind of examples of processes that can be, where they can really benefit from automation, because just, it's a numbers game at the end of the day in recruiting and sales. Like, the more people I reach out to, the better my chances are of finding the right, either customer or recruit. But you don't want to, fully automate everything end to end to the extent that it's anonymous and no one cares, right? Like, if you get a anonymized sales or recruiting outreach email, you just ignore it usually.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, as somebody who's previously received an awful lot of those automated sales emails, I do look forward to better ones that are more contextual, more update. If it could pull something from my LinkedIn profile and reference something that I'd recently commented on or posted, would make it seem more real and maybe even human created. I always used to feel sad when I'd get a cold call sales email and it would reference a company and a job title that was like, 5 years old. It's like, I haven't been an IT manager since like, 2016, and it's, 2021, I was the VP. So I felt sad for them because it meant that they had bought old stale data,
Exactly.
and we're probably emailing thousands of people and getting no response. But yeah, so I know it will help. It's going to help on both sides.
Yeah, my favorite ones are the ones that then mention a different company that you don't even work at. Like, where it's just like clear that they have some sort of automation. It's like not really working.
Yeah. I've
Like,
always and I've seen it where they've obviously got their rows mixed up on a spreadsheet or something. So it was my email address, but referencing somebody else at a different company. And I'd look that person up on LinkedIn, and it's like, oh, you must be sort of next in the alphabetical list of whatever this salesperson has been able to scrape off of the internet or buy from the dark web or something. And yeah,
but I think that's where like the power of automation can really help, if you make it so that, this salesperson can actually review their workflow, customize it in a way that like it actually takes the relevant input data that's relevant for the product or service they're selling, and really make it something that's like truly customized, right? Like, at the end of the day, if I get an email, I don't necessarily care whether the person wrote it like physically with their fingers on the keyboard, or if it was generated, as long as it's actually relevant for me, right? Like, so I think that's something that can unlock a huge amount of value for companies and individuals, is if you make it easy for them to build and maintain their own automations.
Yeah, and relevant is one of the key words there, and this will lead into my next question. And I've seen this through advertising that's been targeted to me, and obviously I've got a bit of background of how this has been previously used, as I worked for an advertising agency for a number of years. So with the rise in AI-driven content creation, how can marketeers leverage these technologies to optimize content strategies and ensure brand messaging resonates effectively with target audiences?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I don't work in marketing, myself. So, I don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of marketing. I think on a high level, I would say, all the things we talked about before are true here as well, where it's all about, targeting, positioning, personalization, and so on. I think, again, if you look at the overall application of AI in the last, especially 2 to 3 years, since the advent of, large language models,
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the first places where it was applied was marketing copy, at least where it was applied at scale. So, at this point, there's a lot of different tooling out there, a lot of different, products that will do this for you. again, I think the key is really like, can you give the, you know, AI or language model or whatever you want to refer to, the right input data to make it relevant for your own brand. I think some exciting stuff that I've seen recently is multimodal generation. So, you know, now they can generate like, you know, copy is one thing, but even like images, product placement images that are super customized to like, you know, maybe I'm buying, let's just say Coca-Cola as an example. Obviously, everyone knows Coca-Cola, so it's like an easy one. Maybe like I'm at the beach right now and I want to see a picture of a, you know, ice cold Coca-Cola on a beach. Will probably make me more likely to buy it than seeing this, you know, ice cold Coca-Cola in like, you know, some other setting, like say on a, you know, snowy mountain, because that's not relevant to me right now, right? So like, I think that there will be something that we will see in the, I mean, we already see it to some extent today, but I think we'll see it more generally in the very near future is, you know, highly personalized advertising and marketing, both on a copy level, just the text, you know, understands me as a person, what I want to hear, what I want to refer to, but also like on images, and then like third stage is even on videos. Like I've seen companies, few startups that actually will generate a full video, for example, for Amazon marketplaces or like their own, you know, shopping site, that, you know, that are like high volume resellers that would sell like thousands of items. They can't physically create videos for every single item. It might not be worth it just in terms of throughput and production cost and all these things. But now they can actually generate, you know, they give it the text, they give it a product description, and it will generate like a, you know, pretty good like marketing video that's like, you know, good enough for like a, you know, low cost item that I would buy off of Amazon or whatever shop I'm using. And I think that's that kind of stuff, like multimodal content generation, highly personalized and highly kind of contextualized, you know, content, even beyond just text. I think that's like the next big thing we'll see there. So yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what can be done with the AI driven image creation. Some of my friends have discovered that and have become very creative and posting a lot of pictures that they've created of random things. Mostly trucks out in the wilderness in different scenes that they've been doing. And it's interesting, you know, as you were going through and talking about that and this very contextualized and personalized, reminded me of scenes again, thinking about Hollywood in Minority Report. And I think even in Total Recall, you know, which came out in the 80s, 90s, had really personalized advertising. And either it's very coincidental or suspicious that I've even seen some of that hyper personalized advertising, and I'm sure it does exist. I visited Maine in October for a vacation, and I was curious of price of the cost of houses around there. So I've got a Zillow alert to see what the real estate is like in that area. And now in the last week, Hulu have been showing me commercials about all of the reasons to come and live in Maine. Either that is completely coincidental, and I would like to think that Maine has just decided to advertise to people in the New York metropolitan area to come and live there. But then on the suspicious side, I'm thinking, is my device and Hulu and Zillow and everybody else talking to each other and sharing my data and really crafting something very contextual for me?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to comment obviously on the use of cookie technology and so on. It's a very loaded topic, but you know, like I know that like for me personally, I have nothing against, you know, targeted advertising. Again, I think actually, you know, there are some products that I would love to learn about that I maybe just don't have the time, you know, to do the research, or like I'm not big into like shopping or researching stuff. I will not by myself discover new products. It's like I usually get it through friends who recommend stuff, or, you know, targeted ads. And sometimes these actually like have a positive impact in our life. So I think like, you know, that having said that, there's this like interesting like chasm today where it's like starts being creepy when it's too customized and personalized. But yeah, I think there again, like sci-fi is a great prediction for us. It's kind of funny, right? Because like you look at different like sci-fi movies and so on, and or books. And I think, a lot of the technology that we do work on and build these days is, maybe sometimes inspired by the sci-fi, or like they've correctly predicted. It's hard to say like which one is which, but I think it's sometimes interesting how accurate
Yeah. Yeah.
which I turn out to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So lastly, it's been great to chat to you for the last 50 odd 45 minutes. But lastly, in our closing question, how can individuals and society prepare for a future in which AI plays an increasingly important role? Certainly when we're going to have better AI-driven applications.
Sure. I think, it's a really loaded, hard question as a last one.
I know.
I think for me personally, what I would recommend is just like be open-minded. I think there's a lot of people that I talk to, in my daily life and so on, and like AI almost always comes up, when you work in the field, everyone's like, and especially these days with, OpenAI and so on being in the news every day, like it always comes up as a conversation topic. And I see a lot of people are very reserved. Again, maybe because of Hollywood, maybe because of some horror stories or horror scenarios they're thinking about. But I think like ultimately no one, at least no one I know working in the AI or automation field is trying to harm anyone or, build any automations that would not benefit people. So I think generally be like open-minded. I think it's a huge amount of opportunity now in the field that technology is becoming more and more accessible, and the price point is coming down to the extent that like, previously AI was reserved for either you're like a nerd and you program, or like you work at a big company that has a budget to hire consultants or build their own in-house AI machine learning team. I think these days with, tools, like ChatGPT, but also things that like what we're doing where try to actually make it actionable for end users, and obviously tons of other companies in this field out there right now. I think we're at a time now where like actually most people can actually create value or utilize AI and or automation technology in some way, and then just be creative, right? Like it's ultimately about what you ask of a system or what you try to achieve with a system. Chances are that it can help you with it today. If not, like, be loud about what you're trying to achieve. People will listen, and everyone's trying to learn from users and customers as to what to build. So I think if you have a specific use case in mind, especially if it prevails to automation or automating your repetitive workflows, reach out to us or, whoever other companies you're working with and let us know. And like, we're there to help. We want to help people achieve the best, and we want to make it so that everyone can focus on the things that they're good at and that they enjoy doing. And we can leave all the annoying and repetitive work, to machines, because that's what they're great at. So
okay, well, thank you ever so much, and thank you to everybody for listening to Pascal talk about his platform. Where can listeners test out, view, see the platform?
Sure. So Bardeen is free to use as a Chrome extension. Just go to bardeen.ai. Can probably link it in the show notes or something.
Yeah.
And then, it has a button all over the page where you can say like try for free, and it will download the Chrome extension and you can use it from there. And then we have a really cool feature that we call Magic Box, where you just describe in natural language what you want to do, and we try to build the automation for you automatically. So that's what I would recommend as a starting point.
Excellent. Well, I'll certainly give that a go myself. And thank you once again for joining us, and thank you everybody else for listening to this BetterTech podcast.